They marched her out at dawn, when the twin suns lounged low and mean over Thranisfor. Like two eyes that never blinked, the escort wore mirrored helms and charcoal armor painted with the sigils of House Vale. A pair of hooked crescents clasping a star. Boots hissed in the powder-dry sand. Behind them rumbled a black skimmer whose hull had been polished until it swallowed the horizon. Within it, the alien Baron Valor reclined on a couch of cool gel and shadow. It smelled, faintly, of citrus and old blood. Serenia took in every detail. She had trained herself to do that, because detail was how you survived people like her father. Her left leg hated her. It had from birth twisted through the knee, muscles clumped wrong. Walking sent a scatter of fire up her hip. Today the pain had a crispness like snapped glass. The escort never slackened their pace. When she stumbled, a gauntleted hand caught her under the arm and lifted. Impersonal as a forklift. "This is far enough," said the Baron's steward, a narrow being whose face had been refined into a permanent expression of indifference. The dunes here rolled like sleeping leviathans. Wind combed the surface into ripples fine as fingerprints. Far off, heat shimmer made pillars of air float up into the sky and dissolve. The skimmer sank, graceful and opened like a blooming metal flower. Shadows pooled beneath its petals. Valor descended last, his carapace gleaming like wet obsidian. His facial crests arranged with exquisite symmetry. He wore no respirator. The desert air fed itself into him as if the planet were paying tribute. "Daughter," he said. Tasting the word for impurities, Serenia kept her chin up. The sun cut a crown of white heat around his silhouette. "Father, it is a name of honor," the steward murmured, just loud enough. "Do not profane it." Valor raised a hand for silence. He came closer, very close, until she could see the hairline fissures in his crest where a dueling knife had once struck and failed to kill him. He lifted her chin with one long finger. "Your birth cost me 8 days' revenue and a wife," he said, voice silk smooth. "I expected recompense. Instead, I have borne a ledger of disappointment." His gaze flicked to her left leg and back. "The court whispers. Traitors hedge. Enemies laugh. I cannot afford a blemish in a house that rules by fear and proportion." "Proportion?" Serenia said. Her mouth felt full of sand. "And what is the proportion for being born wrong?" "Removal," Valor said, with the calm of a math problem already solved. The steward produced a cracked water gourd and a bundle sealed with resin twine. He placed them at her feet as if bestowing favors. Valor lifted his face to the sun's. Their light varnished him. "This is not cruelty, Serenia. I am merciful by nature. The desert judges swiftly. It does not prolong suffering. If there is any order at all in the universe, it is found here." He turned. The escort shifted in unison. In the shadow of the skimmer, Serenia caught her reflection in the hull, a thin figure with a shaved scalp and a leg that refused to line up with the rest of her, a mistake written in meat. "You are not brave enough to kill me yourself," she said, not loudly. Valor paused at the ramp. He did not look back. "Do not flatter yourself," he said. The skimmer closed around him like a mouth. The dunes absorbed the sound of the engines at once, as if offended. In seconds the skimmer was a dark insect crawling across a bright blade. Then it was only heat and horizon and the low hiss of wind polishing grains against each other. One infinitesimal act of erosion at a time. Serenia waited another minute just to prove she could. The silence pressed on her bluntly, not interested in theatrics. Eventually her stance wobbled. Her leg trembled. She crouched, gritted her teeth, and dragged the bundle into her lap. Inside, a length of suncloth with more holes than weave. A rusty knife whose edge had convinced no one for decades. A coil of monofilament, 3 dried nutrient wafers dense as regret, and a small emergency signal puck with its casing meticulously cracked. The gourd sloshed. When she drank, the water tasted of resin and salt. "They plan for everything," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her wrist. "Except for being wrong." She slipped the suncloth over her shoulders and head. Its shade felt like forgiveness. The cloth stank faintly of the skimmer hold, of oils and dormant ozone. She tied the coil around her waist, tested the knife on her thumb. It scraped. It did not cut. Then examined the signal puck. The fracture was surgical. Her father's mechanics had blacked the distress beacon, but left the casing intact. presumably as a ceremonial gesture to themselves. She pried open the seam with a nail and peered inside. The central emitter was intact. The power cell, however, had been relieved of its dignity and its charge. She turned the knife over in her hand. "You're not dead," she said to the puck. "You're dormant." The dessert had its rhythms. She had learned them through the palace windows, sneaking books meant for the staff. On Thranis, the morning was a window of pressure before the suns climbed and made thinking feel like moving. Through syrup, she tore a narrow strip from the suncloth and wrapped her knee tight, binding the muscle into alignment. When she stood, the pain shifted from a scatter to a single hot line. She had traded chaos for a boundary. It would do. The dunes looked the same in every direction, but there were differences if you knew where to look. The wind cut a prevailing edge on the crest of each dune. The lee side fell away softer, like a breath. She faced into the wind and tasted it dry, metallic, with a pepper of ultrafine quartz. A mirage shimmered to the south, the air thickening as if concealing something it loved. To the west, a darker seam where heat didn't crawl as eagerly. A shade, she decided. Stone, maybe. A place the wind couldn't scour flat. She walked. The brace made each step a negotiation. She set a rhythm. Place the good foot, plant the bad foot, breathe, count to 3. Drink only when the numbers felt slippery. The suns rose and tightened the world. The tops of dunes went white as bone, their shadows sharpening in blue-black pools that collapsed as she neared. Insects, transparent as ideas, skittered across the surface and vanished under the sand. Once, a flat lizard watched her with lidless compassion, and when she looked away it was gone. By mid-morning she saw the stone, a low ridge of basalt scar tissue, exposed like a knuckle. It broke the dunes into eddies of sand and lay there implacably, refusing to give itself up to wind or heat. Serenia reached it and let her body lean against its shaded side. The rock bled cool into her spine. She laughed then, a short ridiculous burst at the pure relief of not being boiled from all directions at once. The bundle of monofilament attracted her fingers again. A coil like that meant traplins, snare work her father's people had left it to feel ceremonious, to perform generosity in the presence of indifference. She knotted a line between the basalt outcroppings, set the line an inch above the sand, and affixed a chip of wafer as bait. Some dessert things preferred salt to sweetness. The wafers were both. Waiting made the mind good or useless. She had learned to keep hers occupied. She took the broken signal puck apart and sorted components on a flat stone, the hollow emitter cone, the cracked casing, the data tooth with its own tiny ridges, the power collar with dead cells welded like beads. She licked the tooth metallic, stale, data teeth like near-field induction. She had nothing to couple it with. She did, however, have a suncloth, a knife, and a planet that specialized in flooding everything with energy. She shaved reflective flakes from the emitter cone and tested the knife again. It still didn't cut. She used friction against stone, grounding her palms, until the blade at least remembered its purpose. She opened the power collar and found a pair of thin conducting veins, still bright under the corrosion. She considered the suns. The suncloth's weave was conductive in places to repel static charge. The palace version had been too, and she had been scolded for taking one apart once, a lifetime ago. She smiled, slow. "Hello, old habit." She stripped one edge of the cloth and teased out a ribbon of wire fiber as fine as hair. She bound it to the conducting veins with wrapped monofilament and spat to wet the binding. Then she set the emitter cone on the stone, oriented toward the sky, and laid the power collar in its shade, a crude rectifier assembly that would have made a real engineer pity her. She knew enough to keep the thing from shorting itself to death. She knew enough to be dangerous to despair. A soft tug on the monofilament line. She froze. The line bowed, held, trembled. She put pressure on the anchors, slid on her belly, and clapped both hands down on a shape in the sand that felt like a thrashing belt. A sandrunner long, slick, eyeless, with a mouth like a coin slot rift between her fingers, its skin a pale peach that was almost beautiful. She apologized to it out loud. Then she pinned its head and cut. The meat tasted of iron and sunlight. She ate with tact, the way you do when your body wants to gorge and you know that is an easy way to ruin yourself. She dried the rest on the hot stone, turning the strips until their surfaces sealed. The act of doing a simple thing well grew larger than it had any right to be. Her chest stopped clenching. Her breath went out without her consent for once and came back when called. She angled the emitter's reflective flakes to concentrate glare on the power collar. The metal warmed, tickled her palm when she tested it. No hum, not yet. But more than nothing. The dessert judged slowly. She could, too. Heat became a physical presence, by noon no longer a condition, but a personality, bored and cruel. The ridge grew a halo of shaking air. Serenia retreated into crevices and wet the cloth under the gourd every 30 minutes. With drops measured in guilt, she slept in 10 breath snatches, waking to count her fingers just to affirm the arithmetic of self. Later, how much later? The suns wouldn't say something changed in the way the light lay on the dune sea. The baseline shimmer that had become the world's heartbeat thickened, went ragged, stretched. On the horizon, a sliver of shadow detached itself and crawled along the line where sand met sky. Serenia's own heart attempted to leave her in a hurry, was denied, and protested by stumbling. Shapes appeared in deserts, thirst-painted miracles. But this had an angle to it, a stubborn rightness that mirages lacked. A tilt of hull, a lick of dust in its wake. She snatched up the emitter assembly. The power collar had warmed enough to pink the skin of her palm. She bound the wire fiber tighter, forced the legs of the assembly to kiss, and breathed on the data tooth until her breath left a fog that flashed away. She felt the faintest tremor, like a bird shivering in a bush. She raised the cone and angled it at the sky. "Come on," she told the world. "See me. Be foolish for once." She had no idea whether the thing in the distance was a customs crawler, a raider skiff, a salvage sled, or one of her father's men circling back to make sure she had died in the proper posture. She flicked the knife open and left it where her hand would fall on it if someone came too close. She tore another strip from the suncloth and tied it to the monofilament line. Strung high anything that made movement where the desert preferred stillness. In the same motion she realized how ridiculous all of it was and laughed again. Hard enough to cough or the shadow grew. The suns played tricks with it, fattened and thinned it, but the angle persisted. It had mass. It had intention. Dust lifted behind it in a wake that said treads or low hover with a sloppy pilot. It wove between the larger dunes, not in panic, but in the hesitant way of someone answering a question. They weren't sure they'd heard correctly. Serenia held the cone aloft and turned slowly, feeding the idea of signal into the sky, hoping the sky would admit the thought. There was a moment she felt it rather than saw it when the cone thrummed like a plucked string. A tiny vibration that chased itself along her bones. "Please," she whispered to no one she respected. "Please," the crawler, because that's what it was now, undeniably angled toward the basalt ridge. Up close it looked like a crate that had grown legs, a patchwork of welded plates, mismatched panels, a canopy made from ship glass etched by sand until it had the milky look of an old eye. The engine coughed and recovered. A mast on its roof bristled with salvaged scanners and a wine-veined rain collector. That had known a wetter world. It drew up with a rattling sigh and settled on its suspension. For a second, nothing moved. Serenity's grip went numb on the emitter cone. She considered the knife, rejected it. She was not about to die, but she could still make poor decisions. The canopy unlatched. Heat emptied from the cabin in a wave that smelled like metal fatigue, and too many meals eaten standing. A man unfolded himself from the seat. He was sun-browned the way leather becomes a biography. His beard had lost track of fashion some time ago, and had no intention of finding it again. He wore a cooling vest patched in 3 different colors and an expression like someone who expected to be disappointed and had made a home in that expectation. His gaze combed the ridge, passed over Serenia twice, jerked back, narrowed. He took in the emitter cone, the crude wiring, the traplin, the line of dried meat, the water-gourd position to catch a tiny sliver of reflected shade. His eyes did not dwell on her leg. This surprised her more than anything. "Signal looks improvised," he said. His voice had sand in it too. "Clever with what you had." Serenia's mouth surprised her. "Would you like to critique my knots next?" His mouth moved in a shape that could have become a smile if someone had given it a few more lessons. "Name's Kale," he said. "You got one." "Serenia," she said, and only after did she wonder whether to lie. He glanced at the twin suns, at the way the heat leaned on both of them alike. You alone. She thought of her father's skimmer, a polished thunderhead on the horizon, and the way its shadow had folded around itself. She felt again the light touch of his finger lifting her chin, like he was measuring an angle. I am now, she said. Cale rubbed the back of his wrist against his brow, leaving a line of clean skin that evaporated instantly. He looked at the emitter again, leaned in, didn't touch. You trying to call orbit with this toy? Trying to not die with it, she said. That's a better goal. He straightened. You walk. Some, she said. It was a good word. It did not include everything. He looked out across the dunes as if consulting an old map only he could see. Heat's going to lay a hammer on this place in an hour, he said. Sandstorm's been talking itself up since dawn. You can hear it if you're rude enough to listen. She listened. Under the scrape and hiss and the low hum of his crawler, there was a new sound far off, like someone shaking canvas. It was very far away, until it wasn't. Cale tilted his head, deciding things inside himself. He walked to the back of the crawler and pulled down a ramp with a grunt, revealed a small world inside. A bench, racks of tools that had been loved despite being bought cheap, a basket of filters, a drone with one wing missing, a framed photo lying flat to keep it from falling to figures you could barely see for glare, smiling at a sky too blue to be Thranis. The cabin's shade reached for Srenya like an animal recognizing another animal. Get in, Cale said. He said it with the same tone with which he'd observed her signal was clever. Not a rescue, not a generosity, a procedural decision, like breaking at a cliff. She nodded and put one hand on the ramp. Her leg wobbled, pitched. The world lurched. A hand caught her elbow, not hard, not soft, just there. She hissed despite herself. Cale pretended not to hear. Inside, the air felt cooler by virtue of having been trapped away from the suns. The seat had an indentation like a previous life. The crawler's monofiber suspension adjusted with a sigh. That sounded like a creature choosing to bear weight. Cale climbed in after her, thumbed switches, checked displays that flickered between sullen and cooperative. Srenya, he said, like he was trying on the sound. You got people who are going to come looking. Folks who think you're worth the fuel. The question should have cut. It only pressed like a thumb against a bruise she'd learned to carry. She looked at the ridge where she had taken the lizard thing, at the little knotted line still tied between rocks, vibrating now with the first distant breath of the storm. The emitter cone lay on its side, reflecting nothing. No, she said. He nodded once. All right. He engaged the drive. The crawler shuddered, rose, and turned its blunt nose into the wind. The horizon tilted. The twin suns slid along the canopy glass like coins pushed by a dealer. As the crawler climbed the first dune, Srenya looked back through the dusty pane. The basalt knuckle shrank, the traplin a strand of hair, the tiny sliver of shade a memory. Beyond it, the desert resumed its neat, merciless geometry. As if glad to have that small irregularity removed, she allowed herself one thought. Just one, as the storm put its mouth to the world and inhaled. I am not gone. You did not erase me. You have only changed the page. Srenya drifted in and out of sleep, the crawler's suspension rocking like an uneven lullaby. Every jolt tugged her leg into a flare of fire. But the cool dark inside the machine dulled it enough that her body finally released the grip. It had held since her father's skimmer left her behind. For the first time in her memory, no steward's whisper of shame echoed in her ears. No courtier eyes narrowed at her limp. No father's silence filled the room. Only the hum of a machine cobbled together from scrap and the presence of the man who had pulled her from the desert's mouth. When she woke again, the crawler was silent. The suns had vanished behind the jagged silhouette of stone cliffs, and she smelled something sharp: ozone, iron, and dust. Cale was outside, his figure black against the shimmer of a brewing storm. He was securing a tarp over the crawler's roof, hands quick and efficient, movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times and failed only once or twice. Srenya shifted to sit upright, grimacing as her bound leg protested. Her eyes scanned the cabin, rows of tools, scattered wires, half-gutted drones, and a dozen things she could not yet name. The place reeked of improvisation, but also of respect. Everything here had a reason for being kept. She felt oddly at home among it all. The man returned, shaking dust from his shoulders before sealing the hatch. His beard was fuller than it had looked in the glare, and streaks of gray threaded through it. He glanced at her, nodded once, and dropped onto the bench opposite. "You lived," he said. Disappointed, her voice cracked from thirst. He ignored the barb and handed her a canteen. "Drink, small sips. Dessert water will kill faster than it saves if you rush it." She obeyed, measuring each swallow like a precious calculation. When she finished, she met his eyes. "You saved me. Why?" Cale leaned back, folding his arms. "Didn't save you. Just pulled you out of the sand. Whether you stay alive is your problem. Then why stop at all?" His jaw tightened. He seemed to consider lying, then shrugged. "Because your signal wasn't just random. You built something out of nothing. That's rare. And because I was a soldier once, and soldiers hate to see waste." She frowned. "Waste? Brains like yours," he said, "and stubbornness. If you'd been anyone else, you'd be a skeleton by now." Her chest warmed at the words, though she buried it under caution. Compliments were weapons in her father's court. She studied Kel's face, rough lines carved by sun and sand, eyes that had seen too much and looked away too little. He was no noble, no merchant, just a man. "I'm not worth much," she said softly. "Then prove me wrong," Cale replied. He stood, rummaging through a crate, and returned with a wrapped bundle. "Eat." Inside were strips of dried meat and a flatbread the color of dust. She tore it carefully, chewing slow. It was bland, tough, but it did not taste of pity. They rode the storm out in silence, the wind screaming like broken machinery outside the crawler. Dust rattled the hull until it sounded like hail. Serenia slept again, lulled by exhaustion. When she woke, the world had shifted. The storm was gone, the sun's rising again, and Cale was tinkering with a drone on the bench. Its wing was bent, sensors cracked, but he was coaxing it back to life with patient hands. Serenia sat up and watched. His tools were crude, his supplies mismatched, yet the machine hummed under his touch. She leaned forward. "Your polarity's reversed," she said without thinking. Cale paused, eyebrow raised. "That's so." She pointed. "The capacitor's grounded wrong. You'll fry the coil." He handed her the tool without hesitation. "Show me." Her fingers trembled as she took it. For years she had only been allowed to observe the work of palace engineers, never touch. She adjusted the wiring, tightened the joint, and pressed the switch. The drone's sensors lit with a weak but steady glow. Cale whistled low. "You've got an eye." Serenia flushed, unsure whether it was pride or fear. "I read manuals. Took things apart when no one was looking. Reading and doing aren't the same." "You've got both." He leaned back, watching her closely. "That's a dangerous mix, dangerous." Her father had used that word too, though his tone had been laced with fear, not respect. Cale folded his arms. "So, who left you out there?" Her throat closed. The truth felt like a blade she wasn't sure she wanted to unsheathe. "No one." She lied. He studied her. "Your clothes say noble. The way you talk, too. But no noble brat gets left in the desert unless somebody wants them dead." Serenia met his gaze. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of choice. She could tell him, reveal the Baron's betrayal, and risk Cale casting her out for fear of crossing House Vale. Or she could bury the truth and remain just a crippled stranger in his care. Her lips parted. "I'm no one's daughter anymore." Cale nodded once, as if that answer was good enough. He didn't press further. "Fair, no one's daughter can still be someone. Maybe even useful. Useful. Not broken. Not shameful." The word wrapped around her heart like armor. Days passed in rhythm. Serenia learned the crawler's guts, its jury-rigged coolant pumps, the solar rays patched with mismatched panels, the engine that coughed like an old smoker but never failed. Cale scavenged in the wastes for scrap and relics, and she rode with him, her leg braced and bound. Every night, he gave her space, never questions. And every night, she grew bolder, asking about the parts, the maps, the fragments of tech he pulled from the sand. One evening, as crimson twilight bled across the dunes, Cale unfolded a tattered star chart. Serenia leaned over it, eyes wide. It showed not just trade routes, but half-erased markings, secret paths. "What's this?" She asked. Pieces of a bigger picture, Kale said. Old empires leave crumbs. I've been chasing them for years. Her fingers brushed the chart. Symbols leapt out at her, half familiar from books she'd stolen from the palace library. She murmured translations under her breath, tracing the patterns. Kale watched her with quiet surprise. You understand this? Not all, but enough. She looked up, eyes blazing for the first time. This isn't just trade. It's pointing to something. Kale chuckled, though there was no mockery in it. Told you you weren't waste. Serenia felt her chest swell. For once, her mind wasn't a curse, wasn't something to hide. Here, in this strange man's world of dust and rust, she was more than the cripple her father had abandoned. She was useful. And that was only the beginning. The desert made time elastic. Days bled into each other, each marked by the hiss of sand against the crawler's hull, the taste of recycled water, and the relentless throb of twin suns overhead. For Serenia, though, each day was a revelation. Kale rarely spoke unless words were needed. But when he led her near the machines, near the maps, near the scraps of ancient tech he hoarded like a miser with coins, she felt as if she were finally breathing air no one else could choke from her lungs. Her father's court had starved her of tools, of permission, of any chance to prove herself. Kale gave her a wrench and shrugged. If you break it, you fix it. It was the closest thing to trust she had ever known. One evening, the crawler rattled to a stop beside the jagged skeleton of a downed freighter, half buried in a dune. Its hull jutted like a rib cage from the sand, blackened from re-entry burns centuries old. Kale nodded toward the wreck. Scavenger's law, he said. First one to open her gets first pick. Serenia raised an eyebrow. And what if the first one's a cripple? Kale handed her a cutting torch without hesitation. Then she learns fast. Inside the freighter, silence pressed like a weight. Their headlamps carved pale tunnels through dust moats and twisted metal. They climbed through ruptured corridors where walls had collapsed into one another like melted bones. Serenia's brace creaked with each step, but her mind drowned the pain. This was no longer a desert prison, it was a puzzle. They found it in what had once been the navigation bay, a fractured console. Blackened and useless to Cal's eyes. To Serenia's, it was alive. She knelt, brushing away dust, and her fingers found seams where others saw only ruin. Help me with this plate, she said. Cal's brows furrowed, but he obeyed, levering the panel aside. Beneath lay a core sphere cracked, but not shattered. When Serenia touched it, the surface pulsed faintly, as though recognizing her. Kale crouched. Dead nav core. Worth some scrap. Maybe no, she whispered. Her golden eyes narrowed, burning. It's not dead. Back in the crawler, she worked for hours, Kale watching with arms crossed. Silent but alert, she rewired circuits with scavenged filaments, adjusted polarity, and murmured to herself like she was coaxing a feral beast into calm. At last, the core sputtered to life. Holographic glyphs spilled into the air, glowing blue-green symbols cascading across the cramped cabin. They hung like constellations, fragments of a map written in a tongue older than any she had studied. Kale swore under his breath, stepping back. What in all the suns? Serenia's lips parted in awe. She reached out, fingers passing through the light, ranging glyphs as though instinct guided her. Shapes formed, not trade routes, not military lines, but a star path hidden in folds of space. At its end, a mark brighter than the rest pulsed like a heartbeat. The vault of origin, she said. Voice trembling, Kale turned sharply. You know this story. Everyone in the Baron's court whispered it, she said, still staring at the map. A myth, a place where the first builders stored their knowledge before they vanished. Technology older than empires, stronger than anything we use today. My father. Her voice cracked, then hardened. He feared it, feared me. He knew I'd find it if given the chance. Kel's gaze lingered on her, searching. So that's why he left you in the sand. Her hands curled into fists. Not because of my leg, not because I was weak, because he knew I was strong in ways he couldn't control. The holograms flickered, symbols shifting like waves on water. The vault's marker pulsed brighter, daring her. Serenia swallowed, her mind racing with possibilities. A place where knowledge waited, where she could prove her worth not to her father, not to Kale, but to herself. Kale broke the silence. If this is real, and I'm not saying it is, then we're not the only ones who'll see value in it. People would kill for less than what that thing's promising. They already tried. Serenia said coldly. For the first time, Kale smiled, not a full smile, but the ghost of one. Quick and sharp. You've got fire. Good. You'll need it. That night, Serenia couldn't sleep. She sat by the hum of the core, eyes fixed on the glowing glyphs. Her leg ached, but she barely noticed. She thought of her father's face, of the word he had spat like poison, blemish. Now she saw truth in the map's light. She wasn't a blemish. She wasn't a mistake. She was a seeker, chosen by fate or chance to find what others had forgotten. And when she found the vault, she would no longer be the abandoned daughter of an alien baron. She would be the one who held the power of the first builders in her hands. In the shadows, Kale watched her, silent, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or fear, or both. The crawler's engine groaned as it pushed up a ridge of pale gold sand. Serenia braced herself against the wall, her newly built exoskeletal braces hissing softly as servos adjusted to each sway. They were crude, stitched together from salvaged alloys, hydraulic tubing, and jury-rigged power cells, but they worked. For the first time in her life, she stood straight without pain. Kale slowed the crawler at the crest and killed the engine. We walk from here. His voice carried a calm weight, but his eyes flicked to the horizon. There, far behind them, black dots shimmered in the heat, a patrol skimmer flying Baron Valer's sigil. They're still hunting me, Serenia murmured. They won't stop, Kale said. Not while you're alive, not with what you found. She tightened the straps around her leg. That I'll give them a reason to fear me. They descended into a valley where cliffs rose like jagged teeth. Serenia's braces sank slightly with each step, hissing and adjusting. But she walked faster than she ever had before. No cane, no stumbling, no whispers of pity. She felt her father's sneer breaking under every stride. Kale carried his rifle, scanning the ridges. The sand was silent, but Serenia could feel the presence of eyes watching. Every dune was a trap. Every rock might hide mercenaries. By nightfall, they reached a cavern carved by ancient floods. Within, the navigation core pulsed faintly in Serenia's satchel. She set it on the ground, activating the glyphs again. They spilled across the cavern wall, painting it with light. Symbols spiraled until they coalesced into a map of the desert. And beyond, a star path leading to the Vault of Origin. Kale let out a low whistle. If this is true, every scavenger, every merc, every noble will want it. It doesn't belong to them, Serenia said, her voice steady. It belongs to whoever has the courage to claim it. He gave her a sidelong glance. You mean you? Yes, she answered without hesitation. The next morning, the sound of engines echoed across the cliffs. The Baron's skimmers had found them. Black-armored figures poured into the valley, rifles glinting in the rising suns. Kale raised his weapon. They'll outnumber us 10-1. Serenia activated her braces. The hydraulics locked with a sharp click. Then we fight 10-1. The mercenaries advanced, confident, careless. Serenia stepped forward, sand crunching beneath her boots. Her body still ached, but the braces turned pain into power. The first shots rang out, blasts of plasma slicing through the morning air. She moved with precision, dodging where she once would have fallen. Kale fired from cover, but Serenia stormed forward, her knife catching sunlight as she struck. The mercenaries underestimated her. They saw only the crippled daughter the Baron had cast aside. What they met instead was a girl reborn in fire and sand, moving with the fury of someone who had been denied her place in the world too long. By the time the suns climbed higher, the valley was silent again. The survivors fled, leaving the black sigil of the Baron trampled into the sand. Serenia stood tall, breath ragged, her braces sparking faintly but holding firm. Kale emerged from cover, lowering his rifle. You're no cripple, he said quietly. You're a storm. Serenia looked toward the horizon, where the map pointed beyond the desert, beyond her father's reach, toward the vault. Her heart thudded like a drum of war. No, she said. I am more than a storm. I am Serenia of Thranis, seeker of the vault. She clenched her fists, fire in her eyes. And I will show my father, and the entire galaxy, what a mistake it was to leave me in the sand. Kale gave a rare smile, one touch with pride. Then let's get moving. The vault won't wait forever." Together, they walked out of the valley, the suns blazing behind them, the map pulsing like a heartbeat in Serenia's satchel. The desert had not killed her, it had forged her into something her father could never control. The Baron had abandoned a blemish, but what rose from the sands was a force destined to change the fate of worlds.